Hi, this is Adrienne King, and you are listening to Horror Heals with Corey and Kendall.
Hello, boils and ghouls. It's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Listeners beware, you're in for a scare, or maybe just a little bit of healing. Welcome to Horror Heals, the podcast where monsters and mental wellness meet. Today, Kendall and I are thrilled, goose-bumpingly thrilled, to welcome Jarid, aka @90skidlibrary on Instagram, to the show. This guy's basement is bursting with Goosebumps, Fear Street, and more nostalgia than a blockbuster video on a Friday night in 1990. So grab your flashlight, hide under the covers, and let's head into Jarid's spooky sanctuary of horror. Hey, Jarid, welcome to Horror Heals.
Hi there. Hi, it's nice to meet you. Happy to be here.
I can see that you were down in your basement library, which continues to grow, right?
Yes, it's getting pretty big. I just put in some new bookshelves. It's taking over. So this is actually my office. But yeah, it was always planned to be an office and a library, and now it's more of a library than an office.
So what's all down there? What do you got down there?
The painting up here, probably my favorite part of the whole library, is actually a painting by Tim Jacobus. He did all the original Goosebumps paintings. Around the time Goosebumps was so popular, there were a lot of publishers trying to break into that kids' horror market. They tried to imitate Goosebumps as much as possible, and one of the ways they did that was by hiring the same artist. So Tim Jacobus painted this for a book in the Bone Chillers series. I bought it from him, and I'm just so happy that I actually own like an original Jacobus painting.
Is he still active?
Yeah, he doesn't do as much, I guess, like covers for books. He does a little bit of that. He actually did some paintings for Magic the Gathering. So he did that recently. But yeah, he's still active, just not with Goosebumps.
Well, I imagine there's quite a few Goosebumps down there. What other books do you have in your library?
Oh, I have so many. I have all the Goosebumps, all of the Bone Chillers books, Spine Tinglers, a lot of the Goosebumps ripoffs. I have Fear Street. So I try to get my hands on anything R.L. Stine. I also have some Stephen King and paperbacks from hell, those 80s horror paperbacks with all the skeletons. So I have a bunch of those as well.
So was Goosebumps your introduction to horror, or what was?
Funny enough, no, because by the time Goosebumps came out, I was probably like 8 or 9. And even before then, I just had such a fascination with horror. I think there's this whole nature versus nurture debate, whether a person becomes who they are because of the way that they were raised or because of their genetics and their DNA. For me, it always felt like I'm a product of my DNA because I've always been me. Part of that has always been really interested in horror. Even when I was very young, I was a huge fan of Gremlins. Anything with giant monsters, Godzilla, and later Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which was a huge, yeah. Everybody in my generation, we were just all obsessed with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And they had these fun, giant, crazy pig monsters and any kind of strange monsters. That was my kind of thing. Beetlejuice, that's another one that I was introduced to very young. But definitely Goosebumps was a big part of my childhood as well.
I appreciate you bringing up the nature versus nurture thing because we love anytime we can cross over our two podcasts. Our other podcast is Family Twist, and it's all about DNA surprises and adoption. Kendall was adopted at birth, and we found his birth family almost 8 years ago. It's interesting that Kendall's adoptive father and mother liked horror. We told the story of how Kendall sneaking into behind the couch and watching them as they watched The Exorcist the first time it was on TV. So on the flip side, though, no real indication that Kendall's birth side of his family likes horror. He's super close with his half-sister on his mother's side. She doesn't like that stuff. His brother, not so much into it. One half sister is totally into it, but out of Kendall being one of seven, that's two of the seven are into horror and the rest.
Exactly. Shout out to my, parents that raised me because they definitely helped introduce. But to your point, I think I had this innate interest. It's funny because I think even with music, I remember when my father bought me the Kiss live, Alive, I think is what it's called, album. And, it's got the really graphic, image of Gene Simmons and the blood dripping down. I wasn't scared of it at all. I was just enthralled. I loved that they fostered that interest.
And I had sort of the flip side, the fearful obsession where my friend had Fangoria magazines that I would look at and be creeped out, intrigued. I couldn't stop looking. And same with whenever we would go over there and he'd put on the R-rated horror movies. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have horrible nightmares, but I can't look away.
Yeah. A lot of my generation who grew up with Goosebumps, we were so entranced by the covers because the covers were very bright, colorful, but also had scary monsters on them, and they were for kids. It was such a new thing. I was actually raised in a religious household. My mom's not interested in horror. None of my family's interested in horror. But I was so surprised when I was allowed to get Goosebumps. I saw them at the store and I was allowed to read them. I think since it was a book, it was like, okay, and I'm reading, no matter what it takes for me to read, they'll just get me anything when I was a kid.
No, it's a good point to make because I remember having a walk-in closet and a bookshelf built in. My mother, anytime she'd come in, she'd come out with a Stephen King novel and say to my dad, where did he get this? Of course, it was my dad who was feeding me those, but it never affected me. I just loved it.
I guess I just wasn't greatly affected by it. It never traumatized me. I just enjoyed it for what it was. I loved the horror elements, the art, the suspense, the monsters. I could appreciate those elements because I wasn't deeply traumatized by it. When I was a kid and I would watch things that were out of my age level, I would be scared, maybe. I just wasn't ready for it yet. But now it's all just fun for me. I love horror.
Well, it's interesting that when we started talking to people about the concept of this podcast, horror and horror culture being good for our mental wellness, people are like, what? Really? With generations of kids raised on Goosebumps, I'm sure that's something that has gone through people's head. We would love to talk to R.L. Stine and find out, was that his purview, or was he just want to do scary stuff for kids? Or was he, the mindset of like, hey, horror's good. It's good to learn about this stuff when you're young because it's going to prepare you. Anytime a parent or a grown-up says, oh no, you can't look at that, then of course you're just going to want to look at it that much more, right?
I think that was part of the excitement about Goosebumps. It's like, oh, wait, are we allowed to read this? R.L. Stine really wants to entertain readers. He wants to bring them joy. He wants them to get reading. Those were his main motivations, I think. Before he did horror, it was all humor. He wrote a bunch of humor books, a lot of joke books in the 80s. I think strengthening kids' reading abilities and bringing them joy and entertainment without hammering them with messages was his mantra when it came to writing.
Completely agree. I mean, as much respect as I have for Shakespeare, when you're 8, it's like, oh my gosh, how much more of this can I read? I need something to be more interesting to me at that age, so.
Yeah, that's one of the major conundrums with early education. They try to get kids to read all these classics that are not at their age level, or maybe they are, but they're just outdated. They're not very interesting. A lot of kids grow up thinking they don't like to read. So it's counterproductive. Now that I'm older, it's fun to go back and read the classics, but I think children, they that's just not the best thing for them to read at that age.
I agree. It's got to be at least somewhat relatable, right? Like, I don't think about Victorian stagecoaches that often. You know what I mean? Like, they're great and they're wonderful.
So does your love of Goosebumps and horror sort of guide you towards your career path?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I'm a professor of psychology. I received education in psychology and neuroscience and learned all the historical perspectives in psychology. I think I have a better understanding now about why I like horror so much. I believe there are several theories out there, and you probably have heard of some of them already. One idea is that we are sensation seekers, those who love horror, meaning that we love thrilling experiences. We like to try out new things. We like to increase our adrenaline level on a regular basis. But when you actually go and investigate that, it doesn't hold up all the time. Even though there is some excitement when watching horror movies, our adrenaline level does go up. It doesn't really mean that we're sensation seekers necessarily, and that's why we enjoy horror. For you guys, do you feel like you are? Do you like roller coasters? Do you like those types of skydiving?
Not skydiving so much. That's where I would probably draw the line. But I'll get on a thrill ride all day long. Kendall, hell no.
No, it's just not my thing.
Right, and that's been my experience when I teach several different courses. One of them is experimental psychology. Pretty often, horror makes it into the discussions because I love horror so much, and so many of the students love horror. We discuss why we like getting scared. It's a strange puzzle. We shouldn't like to be scared, but we do in some situations. One of the things we discuss is sensation seeking. I have them all take a sensation seeking scale so they can figure out what their score is, like how much of a sensation seeker they are. I found that maybe half of them who like horror movies are high in sensation seeking, but the other half are not. So it's not a very good explanation for why we like horror. I can speak for myself. I am not a sensation seeker. I don't like exciting things. I like to stay home. And when I watch horror movies, part of it is maybe this adrenaline, this excitement, but I know that I'm safe. So it's different. I'm not really skydiving. I'm not really jumping off a bridge with a bungee cord. It's a different experience. And I think that so there's a bunch of different theories. I mean, another one is that we have pent up emotions that we don't express often enough, and we experience them on some unconscious level. So we may have these unconscious feelings of fear and anxiety, and we need to let them out. We need to express them. And that's more of a psychoanalytic Freudian approach. Like Sigmund Freud would talk about catharsis, right? This idea that we need to release these emotions. I think horror does that in a pretty effective way because we get scared, we're able to release this fear that we've already had inside of us. And Wes Craven talked about that. That was his theory about why we enjoy horror and why we need horror. The fear is already inside of us. Horror movies, horror stories, they don't create fear. We already have the fear. But when we watch something scary, the fear gets released. And that's catharsis. It makes us feel better, right? And once we release that pent up fear, that pent up anxiety, whatever it is. So I can definitely, I think that's part of it as well. But I think there's another really difficult to pin down part of why we enjoy horror. Horror has been around for, I know, so the earliest stories that we have record of have really strong horror elements. Just look at Greek mythology. There's tons of horror in Greek mythology. And and really a bunch of stories from a vast number of cultures. We have record that, wow, horror just seems to be part of human nature. According to some theorists, we have a collective unconscious, suggesting that we all share so we all have an unconscious mind, and some of that unconscious mind is just shared amongst all humans just by the very nature of being human. Horror stories speak to our unconscious mind in a way that we can all share the same experience. When something speaks to our unconscious mind, it feels better. Like, oh wow, this, I don't know, the story really gets us. This character, this villain really resonates with me. The real reason that we like horror so much is because it just strikes us on some unconscious level. So, like, for example, it's hard to describe why you like something, right? Congratulations. One of the hardest things to do if you're in a relationship and your partner might ask you that, I know that you love me, but why do you love me? That's a challenging question because even though we can definitely pinpoint some things that we like about our partners, that we love about them, we can say that they're kind, they're generous, we can say that they're talented, they're attractive, they're considerate of others, all of these extremely positive qualities that, of course, you love those things about them. But you could probably pinpoint those same characteristics in someone else and like a thousand other people, but you don't love them. Okay. So it suggests that there's some reason why you love your partners, but it's unconscious. You really don't know the reason. It's somewhere deep down. You're vibing with somebody, right? Chemistry, you have chemistry with somebody. It's just our way of saying, well, I know there's some reason I like this person. I love this person, but I don't know what it is. It's somewhere down in your unconscious. That's why you can't identify it or put words on it. And I think the same is true of horror. I think we love horror because there's just something deep down in us on an unconscious level, and it speaks to us, especially to horror fans. So that's my understanding.
For us, there's certainly some things that we'll never fully understand, but Kendall is skeptical about a lot of things. I think he would agree that when we met and locked eyes for the first time, it was essentially love at first sight. We had our first date a week or so after that, and we've been inseparable ever since.
Do you feel like it was just kind of on some deeper level, right? It wasn't something that you could properly identify.
Yeah.
Yes. I felt something immediately.
For
That's
sure.
so cool. I want to ask you guys something else. Now,
It's okay. We like to be analyzed.
So, I love horror and I love collecting as well. Do you guys collect stuff? Do you collect horror as well?
I do.
Yes.
Kendall's like, no, he wouldn't, but I've kind of forced him into it. Yes, we do collect.
I'm not a collector really of anything, I think, but that's just my nature. But I do enjoy that Corey does. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a collector like all my life. Toys, comic books, never really got into like baseball cards and stuff. And then in high school, it morphed into autographs. And then once I started going to conventions, then it was like more focused horror themed autographs and horror stuff. And now it's like I try to be a little bit more conscious of how much space we have. So I'll get a poster signed by everybody in the whole film series rather than just the 8. We've got albums of 8x10s. And plus I was an entertainment journalist for a decade. So I got a lot of stuff through that. I like looking at our collection, It's like I'm not doing it just like put it away in a vault. It's like I like to look at them. I look at the art. If we find a piece of art that we really like, we'll get those things signed as well. So I think it makes it a little bit more special when it's a unique piece. We've got Kendall actually got me as a gift. We were living in San Francisco. They were doing a retrospective screening of the original Evil Dead at the historic Castro Theater. And they had like a limited edition, like 150 prints of this, this great piece. It's like silver artwork and stuff. I've had several of the cast members sign it, but this year Sam Raimi signed it. He's like, oh, never seen this one before. And so he kind of marveled at that for a little while. So
isn't that always
that's
the best?
cool.
Like bring them something they've never seen.
Yeah.
I've got a Polish Night of the Living Dead remake poster that I've had the cast sign, and most of them I've never seen that one either. George Romero had never seen it, actually.
Where are you guys located generally? I saw you were at Monster Mania. Is that right?
Yes. So we're on the seacoast in New Hampshire, right next to Maine. I've driven, I think I might have flown once or twice to Monster Mania. When my cousin was living here, he's a horror fan too. He was my con buddy, and we would just take off in the middle of the night and drive through New York City and stuff and get down there. But yeah, it's not next door, but
yeah, I'm in Delaware and I grew up in South Jersey, actually in Cherry Hill, which is where they shuffle between Cherry Hill and Philly and now Baltimore.
They moved to a new location in Maryland this year, which evidently they really like. Did I go to any Monster Manias this year? I did not. No, I haven't been to a Monster Mania this year, but love them.
Well, I really want to go to horror conventions like all the time. I struggle to find time to do it. I got a full-time job, full-time family. But yeah, I did go finally in August this year. And I met Robert Englund, did a photo op with him. I met Heather Langenkamp, the cast of Nightmare on Elm Street, Doug Bradley, Pinhead from Hellraiser. It was just so cool. So yeah, I'm trying not to get too deep into collecting those things because it's much more expensive. Also, wall space is limited. Books are a little easier.
Our house is bursting at the seams with horror art.
I'm definitely there with you. I've been doing this for a long time and I've heard, people talk about this recently, like they're getting priced out of the conventions because it's getting more and more expensive. I get it. It could be very lucrative for somebody, even if they've just been in one horror movie, and this is an opportunity for them to walk away with a suitcase full of cash. I'm all about capitalism, but at some point you got to think about the fans. I've seen people there and you just know they're saving up. This is their vacation. They're saving up the whole year for this. And they're not getting to have the same experience they had 5 years ago or before the pandemic because it's more expensive now. It's way more expensive. When I first started collecting, I didn't mind paying whatever Robert Englund was charging for a gift from my nephew just because I knew it would be really special. That was the first horror movie that we watched together because I already had 3 or 4 Robert Englund autographs that I didn't pay for. When I interviewed him, like he's just signed everything, so it's like, okay, well, I feel like, okay, like, all right, I can justify occasionally paying for an autograph because I've gotten so many for free over the years. But it's like, at the same time, now they're, now we're seeing mainstream people doing the conventions, Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis. And it's like, I've got a League of Their Own poster signed. When we were living in California, they had a reunion of the cast, and Penny Marshall was there at this convention called the Hollywood Show. And so I've got like a dozen autographs on there. Am I ever going to get Tom Hanks? No. Am I ever going to get Madonna? No. Rosie O'Donnell, maybe her, and Gina Davis is probably my top because I really love her as an actor. And it would be the icing on the cake to have her signature on that poster.
Yeah.
Well, folks, whether it's Goosebumps, Gremlins, or just a good old-fashioned psychological deep dive, one thing's for sure. Horror has a way of getting under our skin and healing us in ways we can't always explain. Big thanks to Jarid for sharing his amazing library and his insights on why we love to be scared. Don't forget to check him out on Instagram. He's at 90s Kid Library. You're in for a dose of 90s nostalgia that's going to give you chills in the best way possible. And until next time, remember, when someone asks, is horror good for my mental wellness? You tell them, of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.